Welcome, everyone. I call the March 18, 2026 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purpose of tonight's meeting is to hold study sessions on the Transfer Development Rights LCLIP project, the Housing Action Plan Development Update, and the Downtown Subarea Plan Update. Before we move on to agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our hybrid meeting format. City of Bothell is providing the option to attend this meeting either in person or remotely via Zoom. For those participating via Zoom, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. Please limit all comments to 3 minutes. Please note that the City of Bothell does not tolerate verbal harassment. Remember this during your comments. Public comment will be allowed both in person and via Zoom. Those wishing to comment via Zoom were asked to submit an online form by 3 p.m. today. People wishing to submit written comments were also asked to submit those comments by 3 p.m. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. Those in attendance may also make comments and have been asked to indicate their desire to comment on the sign-in sheets. The Imagine Bothell Notice, City website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. Video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the City's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For phone-in callers during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they're referencing so that everyone can follow along. At this point, we'll take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners. Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Here.
Commissioner Lever.
Here.
Commissioner Robson.
Here.
Commissioner Sills is absent and excused, and Commissioner Gustafson is absent and excused. Also attending, we have Community Development Deputy Director Gates, Cameron Calvin, Senior Planning, Ray Sosa, Senior Planning, Jacqueline Sampson, Planner, and Morgan Shoup, Director of Eco Northwest. Before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. And if you are streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there is delay. For commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I'll be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you want to speak, please indicate this by raising your hand, and I will call on you as I see you. This will help avoid the problem of having two people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, second a motion, or participate in debate. Please mute your microphone when not speaking. First item on the agenda is public comment. The city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-in sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Since there is no one in the audience, I expect we have no comments there. Have we received any email comments?
No email comments were received. There is one member in the audience in the Zoom waiting room that if they would like to indicate a desire to speak, they could press the raise hand function and we can panel them in.
We'll wait a moment for that.
It does not look like they want to speak tonight.
All right, thank you. So there are no public comments. With that, we'll move on to approval of the February 6th minutes. Is there a motion to approve the February 6th minutes? Commissioner Robson.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Lever has seconded. Any comments on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of approval of the February 6th minutes, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved unanimously. That moves us on to our primary agenda item, the study session. Our first study session will be regarding the Transportation Impact Fee and Municipal Code Title 17 updates. No, that's wrong notes. I pulled up the wrong agenda. Our first item, First item will be Transfer Development Rights, the LCLIP project.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be back. My name is Jacqueline Sampson. I'm a planner here in community development. And today I'm joined with Morgan Shoup, who is a director at Eco Northwest. And today we will be discussing the TDR, or Transfer Development Rights, and LCLIP, or Landscape Conservation and Local Infrastructure Program Study. So let me just keep on moving. So council action today. No action required. The Planning Commission will be briefed by city staff, the Washington State Department of Commerce, and Eco Northwest on the transfer development rights and LCLIP feasibility analysis. So these are some discussion questions we have today, just to guide some the conversations we'll have after the presentation, but also feel free to ask any other questions that you may have on the study. So now I'm just going to turn it over to Morgan.
Great. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Again, Morgan Shook. I'm a director at Eco Northwest, but I would say in this capacity, I am wearing the hat of a lead technical team that is providing assistance to the city of Bothell via a grant from the Department of Commerce. And so the city was, I would say, recruited, and had a conversation on trying to align the state's interest in advancing the Transfer Development Rights Program that exists throughout the state and is consistent with the Growth Management Act, and trying to sort of conserve our rural and working landscapes, but at the same time support cities' efforts to grow their urban places. That effort is joined with an evaluation of the LCLIP program, so the Landscape Conservation Local Infrastructure Program, LCLIP for short, that was created in 2011 and is now paired with TDR. And so tonight, meeting is really to do twofold. I think one is to educate you on what I would say are probably two of the more, I don't want to say complicated, but sort of have multiple moving pieces. We're going to be talking both about transfer development rights as well as tax increment finance. So we'll be getting into the details, but I'll try to give you also the Cliff Notes working version of that. And then the second piece is we're looking for advice and guidance from you as we entertain our study areas and try to think about some of the tensions within the program that we're going to be addressing going forward. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So our just quick rough outline tonight is to make sure that we spend a little time, I think, first just realizing what is being asked of the city here. So there, at this feasibility study has a commitment from the city to do a robust and thorough effort to evaluate the use of TDR and LCLIP in the city, and then to provide staff time, engagement both with the Planning Commission and the Council on the findings of that. There's no condition as part of that feasibility study for the city to take any action on the land use code or create an ordinance. But think of it as basically the study is really trying to find the best case option for the city to do so and take advantage of both programs. At the end, if there is a path, what we'll be doing is giving the city sort of a guide way to sort of implementation. And so all to say is like the feasibility study will take you to that answer, but we'll also, if the conditions are right, show you how you can easily make these sort of mechanisms and maneuvers and actually to create the program. So I think it's important to kind of start here a little bit about what is the project and what is actually being funded by Commerce. So today, then, I think we really want to talk about those two tools and then talk about that outcome. So let's go to the next slide and just get right into the kind of the 101 parts of this. What is transfer development rights? At its essence, it's exactly what it says. We are trying to take a development entitlement in one place and transfer it to another. This has been used historically, both in the affordable housing as well as historic preservation, to kind of allow properties to sell their air rights and transfer that density to other projects and giving them project income. But in the sort of rural landscape conservation context, what we're really talking about is at much larger geographic scale. We are trying to transfer development rights that exist within our resource and working lands in rural areas and transfer those rights into our urban places. And so creating these sort of mechanisms both at sort of a conservation, like what lands should be conserved, to what lands are we trying to sort of incent additional growth. And so that's TDR in a nutshell. The complication piece of that, from the city's perspective, is how do you design codes and policies that create incentives for people to basically go out and buy these development rights. And I think you guys probably aren't, you've been already having done your affordable housing and the housing action plan, know quite a lot about sort of incentive zoning, inclusionary housing. A lot of the same things are in play here, right? You're trying to design prices and performance within your code that then give incentives for developers to go do something, right? In that case, it might be to build or perform for affordable housing. In this case, what we're trying to do is design those codes for people to go out and buy development rights in rural areas. So I think with that, we want to also start the fact and acknowledge that the city already has a transfer of development rights program in a very much more limited sense. I think that is more analogous to the way affordable housing or historic preservation has used transfer development rights program. And so in the Canyon Park area, a specific site owned by Sound Transit has been given the ability to sell excess development rights to certain properties within the Canyon Park area. So if we look at here, going back to 2020 all the way to 2026, right, there's an MOU between Sound Transit for preserving roughly 250,000 square feet of excess floor area for the sale as part of TDR. To date, Sound Transit has not actually chosen to sell any of those development rights. But the idea here really is to sort of, because that site was not upzoned and providing more capacity to do other public policy priorities with the city, that ability on that site exists. And so if you go to the next slide here, right, is simply the graphical representation of the city's current TDR program. So the future transit bus base site, right, can transfer additional capacity in 1,000 square foot increments to receiving areas within the Canyon Park sub-area plan. Okay, so I think that's good to kind of just start there, because what we're now going to be talking about is a much more regional program where sites will be able to receive, like, so they're still receiving areas there, like in Canyon Park, but they will be able to receive credits, development rights from sending sites, what they call basically those places that can sell development rights within Snohomish County, King County, and Pierce County. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so that's TDR in a nutshell, and you guys have some familiarity as a city already. What the state legislature did in 2011 was allowed qualifying cities, basically city I think is above, I want to say 10,000 in population at the time, in Pierce, Snohomish, and King County, to access a tax increment financing program known as LCLIP, on the condition that they pair that with a TDR program. And this is kind of where these two things meet. If you create a TDR program that meets the rules of LCLIP, you then have access to incremental property tax revenues from the county that the land use sits. And Bothell is a very novel case because you have portions of your city there, both within King County as well as Snohomish County. So this would be wherever the receiving sites are that you draw your boundaries around, you would receive that incremental portion of property tax from that counting. And the purpose of the LCLIP was really to say, we know that creating successful urban places isn't just about putting more people and employees everywhere. We know we have to build the physical ecosystem that supports them through better roads, bike lanes, mobility investments, parks, open spaces, right? We have to, and that, you know, as we have all learned, is very expensive, and cities are always faced with a dearth of resources for building out that capital. And so here, think of it as LCLIP was offered as an incentive to help further the growth management goals of conserving rural lands. So vis-a-vis TDR programs, vis-a-vis additional funding for infrastructure. So you can see this is how sort of the additional incentive to create robust TDR programs has been offered through a partnership with these 3 counties. Great. So what portion of that property tax do you have access to? And so what you see in these sort of like concentric circles here is, think of it as basically the inner circle is basically the world that would exist today. The outer circle is the additional property taxes that happen from growth that have been facilitated by TDR. And so in a world there, you see all those new property taxes in that outer ring. What LCLIP does is say, well, the county is basically only apportioning a portion of that incremental taxes. So basically schools, the state schools, other local taxing jurisdictions like the library, they don't participate in this, so they keep their incremental property taxes, but the county is offering 75% of their incremental property taxes. So that little light blue area with the arrow, that's the portion that the county would be steering towards a jurisdiction for participating. So to date, there is only one city that has created an LCLIP program. That's the city of Seattle. Their transfer development rights and infrastructure area is basically South Lake Union in downtown. And so think of it as kind of the perfect storm of doing the rezone in advance of what was 10 years of absolutely historic growth. And the city has retired all of its allocated development rights during that time. And I think they are 9 years into it, and I think they've received, I'm going to get this wrong, I want to say about $10 million worth of infrastructure dollars during that time. And they get to run that for another 15 years going forward. So in the end, they'll probably collect somewhere in the range of $40 million in infrastructure dollars. It's just to give you sort of a sense of kind of the scale that we're talking about for some of these programs. All right, let's go to the next slide. So what can you do with the LCLIP monies? And of all the tax increment laws that are on the books, LCLIP offers us one of the more flexible arrangements. You get to do all the kind of classic nuts and bolts infrastructure pieces with respect to transportation, utility, open spaces. You can also do infrastructure that supports affordable housing projects, but not the vertical piece of that itself. But the key piece also with LCLIP is you get to be able to have some flexibility to use those dollars for operations and maintenance and security. So to the extent that there are public safety and or sort of maintenance pieces, LCLIP will offers you that ability to help maintain those investments within the areas that you're building. Okay, so let's focus on that part on the right. And so the central question we're trying to entertain here is, how many development rights can we retire, right, within the code, given how much development we think may happen within the city's urban places over 25 years, and the revenue potential. And we're trying to figure that out. And the reason we have to figure out the number is the state law in 2011 directed PSRC to allocate all the region's development rights to the eligible cities on an activity unit basis. And so the PSRC does this planning where they convert residential and employees into these activity units, and that's what they're allocating to the region to measure sort of growth going forward. And so Bothell's allocation was 365. And one of the reasons we think Bothell is a great candidate is because at that time, in 2011, I don't think Bothell was anticipating the level of planning for the level of growth that they've seen and are anticipating going forward. So think of it as basically your allocation is relatively less than probably what the growth that the city's going to get. So think of it as basically it's a pretty good opportunity for you to get that 365. And the reason that 365 is important is that 75% of the county's property tax, you get a percentage of that depending on how many of that 365 you choose to accept. So if you choose to accept all 365, you get 100% of the county's allocation or incremental property tax. If you choose 50%, so roughly 180, then you'd only get 50% of that potential dollars. And the reason this has mattered, like think of this as like a performance measure for the city and the county. So the county's saying, we're giving you some scarce resources in our property tax. We want to make sure that you've designed a program that can actually meet the allocation we've given you. And so that's kind of why this sort of key feature of the program is there. Okay, let's go to the next slide. The additional performance measure that the county had was they also didn't want folks simply just to kind of create programs and then kind of forget about them, right? Because we know these programs need a level of maintenance and care over time. And so what they did is they built in some performance thresholds at basically starting your 25 years of potential revenue once you hit 25% of your credit allocation. So once you start that, you can run it for 25 years. But then there's these thresholds that check in at 50, 75, and then the last remaining years, just to make sure you've done this. I would say those feel like really rigid sort of thresholds, but I think the counties in their work understand this, and there's some flexibility around trying to make sure that, that just they want to see basically, hey, your program seems like a little stale, perhaps we can kind of revamp things to kind of get the TDR moving back in place. So think of it as sort of a little bit of a carrot and stick, but I think their interest is in making sure that those programs work correctly, but also they don't want to simply just write cities blank checks for that incremental property tax without sort of making sure that there's performance on the development rights side. Okay. So just to kind of summarize, right, what do the parties get out of this, right? So cities, right, they get a very flexible source of funding for capital, right, that supports their infill and urban growth strategies, right, helps create more resilient communities if we can build out the things that we know we need to build out in these places when we do our sort of long-range and short-range planning. And the counties, right, their interest is really supporting market-based conservation, and not seeing the dissipation of some of those working lands and sort of those rural areas. One, because of the environmental benefits of either food production or resource production or water quality, but also, right, it's expensive for the county to service those areas with respect to public facilities and public services, and so they don't really want to see a lot of demand in those areas. And so the trade-off for that incremental property tax dollars is the sort of gambit that they've offered as part of the program. Okay, so I'm going to pause because that was a lot of information talking both about TDR and about tax increment finance. So I just want to make sure I kind of, at least I would say, summarize it, right? What does this project have to do? We have to find a way to transfer rights, development rights in rural areas to areas in Bothell. And if we can figure out how to do that at scale, we'll be able to allow the city to access a new stream of revenue to build infrastructure in your area. So that's the quick Cliff Notes piece, but I'll pause and take any in-depth questions that you might have.
Commissioners, questions? Commissioner Westerbeck?
Commissioner Westerbeck here. I've got one. Excuse me. I was trying to wrap my head around how the 365 credits is translated. It's an abstract number, so I'm trying to understand how that.
Yeah.
Is there a way to understand?
Yep. Exactly. So the mechanism, right? So how do we do this? So right now in King County.
Well, and what it equals, like.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So just to kind of give you some high-level math. So right now, King County does a lot of tracking of the sale of their development rights, and I can't remember the exact number, but let's say a development right is selling for about $30,000. And so from the city's perspective, what are we saying? We're saying if you developer go out and buy this development right, what are we translating that entitlement into our urban areas? And so the way the math works out that we'll be doing is to figure out like an exchange ratio. And so cities will put this typically in a unit of analysis that they do their regulation, whether that's in height, additional stories, dwelling units, right, per acre, additional FAR. And so the exchange rate will be calibrated as, okay, in downtown Seattle, it's like, oh, I get 5,000 square feet of additional space above my base zoning for every development right I buy. And so that's the number we'll be trying to figure out here in Bothell. If you take that $30,000 credit, what does it really mean in terms of either, kind of think of it as there's two sides of that equation. Revenue maximizing kinds of things like additional scale, height, or cost reduction pieces, right? Well, could we waive X, Y, or Z, or give you some variance here that reduces the cost of the program that you would be willing to sort of like buy yourself down out of? In the end, right, the incentive works as basically saying to the developer, if you buy $1 worth of development rights, I need to find a way to give you $2 worth of value through my incentive structure. And that's the same thing, I think, with like affordable housing programs, right? You're trying to think about the cost of it, but give something that sort of, hopefully sort of offsets that cost.
And then, is that somehow is it flexible then, depending on whether it's extra height or FAR or something like that? How that's translated to the 365, or like, oh, if it's square footage, it's, roughly this ratio, so you're now down to 360 to use or something like that. You use 5,000. Just trying to understand how that's tracked, because if it's sort of subjective per project, I'm just curious about how we're tracking that and getting to that. If we commit to 365, for example, who's tracking?
Yeah, so the county and the
Yeah.
city will be doing annual reporting as part of that process. And so say we do the math and we say, great, we feel like we can design incentive and regulatory structures that can retire 365 units. So the simple math would be like, what if we figured out the exchange rate was 1,000 square feet per development right? So basically we'd have to figure out we got to figure out a way to place 365,000 additional square feet of development capacity to get to those 365 credits. And so there is a process, right, that within the sort of TDR administration that certifies kind of the fact that a development right was purchased and there was one placed, and the city will be doing that kind of annual reporting with the county to sort of track that over time.
And so they're going to be figuring it out as a, like with the city of Seattle, was it a ratio they figured out and then they've just plugged in for the next 25 years? Or is it sort of, they go a little bit on each project is different and how they chip away at those 365? I'm just trying to understand how that's, I realize it would be carefully watched and tallied, but just that, if you commit to them, how do you know it's 5,000 or 10,000 or, sorry, not 10,000, 365. So how do you use a credit? Like you said, it's if you determine it's 1,000 square feet per whatever.
Yeah.
Has that already been figured out?
The city will figure that out. So
The city, okay.
Yeah,
So it might be
exactly.
different for Everett than it is for Bothell.
Exactly. And even within Bothell, within zones, right? You can think in one zone it may be 5,000, in another zone it might be 10,000. In another zone you might be going to a different metric, like dwelling
So
units
it's a
per
little
acre.
squishy.
Yes, it's squishy. You set it in your code, much like you have like.
It will be in the code.
It'll
Okay,
be in the code.
that's key to know. So
Yes.
it will be sort of laid down somewhere.
Yeah. So think of it as basically if you choose to incentivize it in your land use code, it's going to live in the land use code.
Okay.
Some cities have entertained using.
I didn't know that part. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. Some cities
Okay.
have entertained using like the multifamily property tax exemption, right? So it won't be in the code necessarily. It'll be like, it'll be in the code in the sense of like, if you participate in the 8-year MFT program and buy, a credit, we will give you 5,000 additional square footage, right? So like the terms of the arrangement are spelled out there.
So it will be figured out if we adopt this idea and, okay.
Yep.
I asked partly because we've had fee and lieu programs for years, and I wanted to inquire, I did inquire about 1 year ago for, I can't remember if it was public open space or parking, whatever. And the planners very, politely said, well, we haven't really figured out the ratio yet because no one had done it. So and now I understand better that if we went down this road, we would have to establish what those ratios were.
Yeah, and cities, right, think of it as you're constantly trying every sort of, when the world churns on you, every development or economic cycle, right, you're trying to then go back and refigure. You're trying to generally, when you design these things, lock the things that move together, with respect to kind of costs and revenues so that like as the economy churns, like the thing doesn't spin on its axis and it's just kind of moving up and down. But that's a challenging thing to do with the dynamism of prices, and your land use code is pretty static, right? And so we're always trying to think about like, well, what area we should err on this side of sort of uncertainty, right? Because we really want this to kind of happen. But those are the things that we work out with staff on the technical side.
So it could be 5 or 10 years in, you go, hey, we need to tweak it a little bit. They're going too fast, or they're not going fast enough, or something like that. And
Exactly.
maybe
That goes back to
ratio.
the thresholds,
Okay.
why the thresholds are there, because like say something like, I don't know, we figure out AI and the robots build all our housing, right? Kind of thing. Like, well, maybe we need to go back and refigure what it costs to sort of access this additional square footage or something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Jones and Commissioner Lever.
Thank you, Commissioner Jones. This is very exciting, so it's nice to see a market-based approach to this. You mentioned that the city already has a program, TDR program in Canyon Park, and in the report it said, as of February 2026, there have not been any TDR transactions. Do you know why? Because I think that's relevant for
I
us.
don't know why. My understanding, and you'll have to, I don't know if Christian might want to, my understanding is Sound Trans has not chosen to sort of offer these rights for sale yet. But I don't know with respect to sort of what's happening on the buyer side, but.
Yeah, we're looking to see, we're anticipating that they will be available in the near future. We've got a bit of a learning curve to catch up to what was developed, but with the project just breaking ground, we're anticipating opportunities with that program in the next year or two.
Yeah, that's great, because I think it will be important as part of this analysis to understand the reasons why, because that, while it's not exactly the same program, it may influence the way the program's designed. And it gets a little bit to, I think, Commissioner Westerbeck's point, which I'm glad he asked, because now I understand what we're allowed to do a little bit better. But it is going to be important for this to be transparent, and that more than transparent, actually marketed to developers. So there needs to be a very active program to get the word out and to incentivize and encourage folks. The second question I had, again, relates to progress. And like you said, there's this 25%, then 10 years, it's 50%. Are you going to look at our comprehensive plan and try to give us a sense of what's realistic? Because we do have growth targets, and we have designated areas where we're expecting a certain amount of growth. It seems like we could, of course there'll be some error, right, some uncertainty.
Yeah.
But it seems like we could sort of come up with some estimates of what that should be.
Yes. So to your first question, just to follow on is, the market analysis is data, but it's also some engagement, right? Mm-hmm. Understanding kind of what people are doing, talking to folks doing development, understanding kind of the issues. And so whatever is proposed, right, you want it to feel like an incentive. and that there's a real sort of, desire amongst people doing development to go like, oh, wow, this is actually a really good deal. We should do this TDR program. I got to go figure out how to buy development rights now. The second question with respect to how do we figure out what the right piece is, I think is the central thing that we're trying to do. And I'll just kind of tease this slide here, right? One of the first pieces is to think about scale, right? What places do we want to try to be receiving areas? How much growth are you planning in those areas? What are some different ideas around kind of a low, medium, high for growth? Whatever their sense of like which of those projects will develop intensely enough that they will actually want to buy credits, and given that sort of scale, like how many credits, we're actually trying to do that math to figure that out, right? Because sure, we can look at the planning targets and horizons, but in the end, we got to look at the areas, we got to look at the sites that are likely to redevelop, figure out what intensity that you will develop, what's the code say by right, what's the incentive piece. Okay, well, if that incentive piece, if it's the exchange rate is 10,000 square feet per right, well, that means this project only needs 20,000, so you need 2, right? And we think there's only 10 of those projects in this area, so that's 20 development rights. So that's the kind of math we're trying to figure out, is to get you close to say, given the areas we're looking at, given the code and incentive options to implement it, how many rights are there, right? Because maybe it doesn't make sense to say, take all 365, even though there's an incentive to try to maximize that. But maybe it's something closer to different. But that's that kind of trade-off. If you go back a slide here or two, maybe, sorry, one more. Yeah, this balance, right? How much revenue can you get relative to how many credits can you realistically place? I mean, that's the program design perspective.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this is a first conversation, and then you'll come back with some of that analysis done, because we have a lot of that information. It's just for someone to crunch the numbers, basically, and give us some idea. My last question is really, really pretty simple. you said there's a lot of flexibility with how you use the infrastructure dollars.
Yep.
Does that also include EV charging infrastructure as well?
I would think so. I have to go back and look at the exact pieces, but typically that would fall within their transportation-related improvements. It's deep within the wax of kind of the administrative code of all the specifics, but it's pretty expansive in terms of the legislation. Yep. Great.
Thank you, Commissioner Lever here. Thank you so much. I just want to first say thank you for the presentation. I really appreciated having the visual aid to a very heavy topic, so thank you. That was super helpful. My question is around the coordination between counties. You touched on it, the fact that the city does have the two counties, right? When it comes to implementation, like, what does that really look like, the coordination and setting the rates? Like, how does that really work?
That's a really good question. So to participate, one of the conditions to participate in LCLIP is that the city will have to participate in what they call the regional TDR partnership, which is just a partnership between King, Snohomish, and Pierce County that says that if the city is going to participate in LCLIP through TDR, it has to accept development rights from any of those three counties. So that's the first kind of piece of the partnership. The second piece of the partnership is the counties may want to engage the city in some type of interlocal agreement, just to kind of think of it as basically use the LCLIP law as a framework to basically spell out the arrangement of the agreement. Like, maybe the county would be willing to start earlier than the 20%, right? Or maybe they would like to sort of think about what the changes at the threshold periods. So there could be a part where both, depending on where the LCLIP program is designed, whether it's in just Snohomish side, just the King County side, or both, there might be some engagement with both counties just to spell out the terms of the revenue sharing on the property taxes. So that's the nature. The counties then see themselves as partners, I would say, in this process with the city, because they have a very strong vested interest in advancing their conservation. So I would say they want to design a program where the city is successful, because if you're successful, then the county is successful. So that's I think the nature of that partnership.
Couple of questions.
Sure.
So what happens if the milestones are not met?
If milestones not met, technically the county has the right to sort of terminate the revenue sharing. But this is where the ILA comes in, because I think that, like I said, the county wants the city to be successful and understands that the market doesn't work necessarily in these clean 5-year
Recording
increments.
in progress.
And so one of the things they'll want to be able to do is like talk about sort of, well, what happens at those times, perhaps if a threshold isn't met, what happens in that space.
So the city could conceivably, I'll say, overshoot its goal, not meet it,
Yep.
and then have the development, but not the revenue that goes with it. And it's absent an agreement that addresses that.
If I'm understanding that right, you could have the inverse. You could overshoot your development rights, but you would then, if you make all the thresholds, you get performance.
Now, my
It's if you
question is if you don't.
if you undershoot, if you undershoot it, you can think of it as a situation where you say, we'll take 365, but then you get to year 10 and you're not at 50%, and you're like, oh, well, we thought we designed a program, but we didn't get there. Yeah, so from a technical sense, there is the prospect of the revenue sharing ending, but this is kind of where the ILA and the partnership with the county come in.
Okay. Is there a provision to, okay, we take 365 and in X number of years, things look different. The AI robots take over, or COVID hits again, or whatever.
Yeah.
And suddenly those goals don't seem realistic. Is there a provision for adjusting those goals down the road?
That is a good question. I don't think so, because I think the city of Seattle is in a situation where they're on the other side of that. They actually took a smaller number and shot through that within 10 years. And so they kind of think of it as left a bunch of money on the table because they didn't set that number high enough. But I don't necessarily think the inverse is true. I think once you specify in your ordinance that you're sponsoring what your ratio of the selected one, that one stays in place. Unless, I guess, there's an agreement to supersede that, which the county could always do with the city.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions, comments?
Great. Well, let me go on here with our kind of two pieces. So our project, right, is basically to think of where do you need the infrastructure, right? And then within those areas, how can you retire development rights? Because what you have to do in LCLIP is create what's called a LIPA, a local infrastructure project area. And this is where LCLIP differs from the state's other tax increment finance law, is you can draw a pretty expansive, non-contiguous, or multiple LIPAs, as long as you don't exceed 25% of the value of real property within your city. So you can imagine, like, that's probably, for most cities, that's probably every place that they're trying to do intense urban infill. And so the nice thing about that, right, then is that, you can, because one of the things you have to do is you can only build projects within your LIPA. So even if there's a nexus, like, oh, we got to improve this streetlight this intersection over here, because we got to serve all the growth here, that doesn't count. The projects have to be physically within your LIPA. So when we design, so two things of that nexus, right? Your projects have to be there, but within those LIPAs are also the places where you're designated receiving areas that can take development rights. So those are the two things that have to kind of go. So let's go to the next slide. So what we're doing here then is working with staff is to define study areas that we are trying to do that analysis in. So think of it as the market analysis, the forward projection, the regulatory incentive work. And this is a place here for feedback, right? And these are also the areas potentially where we'd want to be building, investing in infrastructure using those tax increment finance dollars. And so our initial thinking here is both the existing Canyon Park sub-area, the North Creek, Northeast 195th Street area, as well as the city's downtown. And I know, right, you've had multiple planning efforts and sub-area efforts that have entertained incentives and getting larger than the sort of just the base zoning on the condition of doing things like affordable housing. And so here, right, we're trying not to compete with those things, but trying to find opportunities either within that existing code or potentially new areas, right, within those sub areas, the zones to kind of replicate that level of incentive lift. Okay. We've kind of covered a little bit of this already. I jumped around, but this is simply the sort of the regional map of the agricultural and forest lands in King and Snohomish counties. Again, you have to be willing to accept any of those development rights, but Bothell does have some discretion, potentially by policy, to sort of work within those counties to maybe prioritize areas that might be important to the city, like hey, we get all our fresh vegetables from the Snohomish River Valley, so maybe we want to prioritize lands in that area. There are some trade-offs with that, but I think the first thing is just to know that you have to kind of take all those, but there are some maneuvers you could do to say, like, we really want our conservation efforts focused in a certain spot. Okay, great. So going forward here, we're doing a bunch of work right now to look at those study areas to basically get to that point of like, well, how many TDR credits could we realistically accept, and what would be the revenue implications of doing that, and how can we design an infrastructure spending plan that helps us at the margins, right, do more investment in those areas than we would otherwise without those dollars. And so those are the things that we're kind of working on today. So I think our questions are really, at this point, are those the right areas, right? Or what guidance would you give to think about those areas or the other efforts that you have in the city now that you kind of know a little bit about the dual nature of just like, hey, we have to figure out a way to incentivize the purchase of these things within the code. But then if we can do that, we can also have additional dollars to spend in those areas to kind of do investments.
Okay, so again, no action required. Planning Commission has been briefed by staff.
Commissioner Westerbeck, did you have a question?
Yeah, maybe I'm just slow. I want to try and tease something out. Transfer of development rights, like you talked about earlier, are often like used for extra height, FAR, very often building land use related things, whereas what the LCLIP can fund is transportation, utility, public spaces, affordable housing, historic preservation. Is this using TDR to get the things that LCLIP offers, or is it in addition to traditional TDR things like that are related to taller buildings or more FAR or something? 'Cause it seems like there's two different pots of opportunity there. And are they
Yeah,
supposed to
so-
both be in there?
Yeah, so think of it as just a TDR program on its own without LCLIP, right, delivers the public benefits that don't necessarily happen locally, right?
Yeah.
Like they preserve kind of working lands from the places where you're getting the farmers markets or your water quality, resource base or recreation areas, right? So TDR on its own is trying to deliver those set of sort of environmental and other kind of public benefits. The packaging of it with LCLIP basically for the city is to say, great, you get all that stuff, but now we're also going to send you money. The county is going to send you money to go build stuff within your city to support that additional growth that we're transferring in there.
So that, but I mean, if we go forward with this, this is about LCLIP and money, but, cause someone like does this still mean that they're gonna, someone could come and say, hey, we want, the code only allows us to go 60 feet, but we want to go an extra story and do a more traditional or multifamily tax exemption or something? Are those just in another pot entirely, or is this supposed to be amended to this or attached to it as two options? Because then there wouldn't necessarily be money attached to it, and it could have credits attached to it, those 365 credits. So I'm trying to understand if those are those co-equal, or is that just a whole separate program because we already have it in our code? Or does it start to use up those 365 credits? Or am I just muddling the two together? They shouldn't be.
I don't know.
Okay.
But let me kind of, I think I know what you're getting at. So you have your code today, right? That says, okay, let's just, for example, like, okay, by right, you can build 3 FAR here.
Right.
And then with an incentive, you can build to 5, right? Additional 1.5 FAR on the condition that you provide affordable housing. And we'll let you use the MFT program to do that. Great.
Right.
So you could have that arrangement that exists today. So what could TDR do if you were doing that? Well, what you could say is like, well, what if we gave you another FAR on top of that 5 that goes from 5 to 6 on the condition that you do TDR, right? And so go buy that development right, you get that additional FAR, but you got to do your affordable housing first. But then if you can want to get to that additional density and the market makes sense, we've given you a pathway to do that.
And is that drawing on LCLIP funds, or is that just?
No, that's just the developer.
Right. A traditional TDR, which we're used to. Okay.
Exactly.
That's what I'm trying to understand, because
Yeah.
it's like we have one, but are we going to be chipping away at those 365? No.
No, so your existing one is simply, the only program you have now is basically on a specific site that's owned by Sound Transit.
I remember it took a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
I
So
remember
that
it well.
the analogy there is to basically saying, well, instead of monetizing the value of development rights in resource lands,
Yeah.
Sound Transit gets to monetize the rights on their property.
Right.
And they can transfer that.
But
What
the
we're
point
saying-
being, if someone's using that program, they're not drawing on the credits.
Exactly,
These
yeah.
are two different programs.
Two different things, yeah.
That's all I wanted to know.
Yep.
They're not
Okay.
commingled. Okay.
Yep.
It's just a new, different one.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yep.
Now I understand. Like I said, I'm a little thick.
No, that's okay. I was muddling through there with you.
Commissioner Jones?
I just had one question related to the last slide. I think it was the last slide. You said that in terms of the eligible areas, the sending areas,
Yep.
right, which could be the different
Yeah,
counties,
go back one
you had a note that said we should carefully consider the implications.
Yes.
What is that referring, or just some examples
Yes,
of things
exactly.
we should be considering?
So what that means is the really only practical way you have to prioritize that is to give it a stronger incentive, right? So to make it concrete, like say there was an area in the Snohomish or River Valley, wherever it might be, you said like, great, well, we really wanted to, like, I know we have to take everybody, but we really want people to buy development rights here. And the way you would do that is through your code. So instead, what the code is trying to do is say, hey, we'll give you $2 for if you spend $1 on development rights. And so what you have to do in this case is like, we'll give you $3 for every dollar that you spend on development rights there to give you an additional incentive. So what that means, right, is basically instead of the exchange rate being 5,000 square feet for every development right you buy, it's 10,000 square feet, which, if you thought about sort of like there's a fixed pie of those total credits you can get to, just means that there's one less credit you're going to get out of that prioritization. So in a world where like you think it's really easy to get the 365, like that's probably not a big trade-off. But if it's going to be challenging to get 365, you'd be like, well, do we really want to prioritize that? I mean, it's really important, but we also really like the money that comes with LCLIP. Maybe we want to prioritize that. So that's the implication. I think the practical implication we're talking about is you just have to spend a lot to prioritize that relative to the infrastructure dollars you may get.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for that explanation. And then I just wanted to give some encouragement or maybe suggestion that when we look at the receiving areas, certainly align with everything we've been talking about for several years. It would be interesting to understand how it aligns with the priorities for our capital infrastructure plans, whether transportation, utilities, et cetera, as we think about the infrastructure, potential infrastructure revenue we might get. Because with those priorities, we really did have to prioritize. We had to like drop some things and include some things. And it might be nice to know what could we include that we don't have in there. We have a lot of areas that, for example, we have disconnected bike paths, things like that. It would be lovely to know, or we have bike paths that are not up to the standards that we would want for safety and things like that. It would be nice as part of the analysis to understand that.
Yes, and we are. We've sat down initially with the city's Public Works and Parks Department to sort of basically understand this. Just for your perspective, the way cities have done this have kind of two bookends. The city of Seattle was very much along that line, like, hey, we want to within our infrastructure spending plan that you have to develop, and that's flexible. You can change that over time. But what they basically says, we want to correct these bikeways, these greenways downtown. So we're going to take our LCLIP dollars and we're going to spend them on these projects to really help complete some of these missing links. Other cities have basically said, okay, well, given the nature of the money we're coming in, we're going to treat it just like the real estate excise tax, right? It's another capital restricted funding source. It's just going to go into, our capital fund. And now we just have more money to do more projects, right, that are within that area. And so those are kind of just two ways that I think cities approach this and thinking about it.
Commissioner Oliver?
Thank you. I have a question around like the outreach component and the feedback. So how does that really look like, particularly for the rural areas? Like how is their input being incorporated into this process to then potentially identify what are some of those priority areas that will come forward?
Yeah, so we have a colleague who spent many years working in transfer development rights, Skip, and so one of the things you don't have to worry about because of this is the counties themselves handle a lot of the outreach to all of the sending sites, and they're working with property owners just to make sure that they know about the program, and so you have a partner in the county built in to help do that sort of education, like, oh, now the city of Bothell is participating. So our project won't be doing a lot of outreach to those like sending sites, but we will have a conversation both with staff and with you again about sort of like, well, is there things we want to change here to prioritize this? Because it's not so much engagement with those necessarily, as at least in this piece, but like think of it as if you do want to like prioritize certain areas, one of the things you might want to then do is work with the county, right, to say like, great, well, we want these people to know that, they are a priority area, and so developers that are looking to place development rights, they should go talk to people who live in this area, or these people should let them know, right, that like this is a priority area for Bothell. So that engagement won't happen in this project, but if that is a sort of direction that you want to take it, that is a necessary thing you would want to do going forward, is to do that education between the buyers and the development community here, as well as those sending areas that you might be willing to prioritize them. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. And then for that, I have a follow-up question. So when it comes to providing feedback in terms of the areas that are being selected, what is the best way for us to really understand whether or not those areas make sense? And is it like relying on the other bodies of work that we have seen? And the other piece is, how do we make sure that the voices that we assume have been heard in other spaces are actually being incorporated into the fabric, because sometimes that does not happen. So there's some gaps, and I want to recognize those. And having said that, as we potentially build this program, how do we make sure that we understand where those gaps are and what is feasible for us to close, and then what are the other areas that we need to potentially advocate for capacity so that the input is incorporated in the design?
Okay, no, that's really good feedback, and I think, Jacqueline, that's something we can think about a little bit when we think about the sending areas. One of the things that is also part of this grant with respect to the infrastructure spending and design is to look through sort of an equity-based focus on it, just to make sure that, like, hey, the Puget Sound Regional Council has done a sort of disparities mapping process. And so when we think about the projects themselves, particularly the investments, are we investing in a way that is actually trying to also address any sort of disparate sort of treatment or vulnerable populations within the area? So I think it is basically the dollars that you're spending for infrastructure. Can LCLIP be directed in a way that also furthers the city's goals around making it a more equitable place? So we're, in that case, we're not doing a whole lot of engagement, but we are relying on the past work that the city has done to make sure that we're guiding that process as part of this feasibility study.
Other comments? All right.
Great.
Well, thank you very much. We'll look forward to hearing more about this.
Thank you for the questions.
It's intriguing, so.
Thank you for the questions and the advice. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Morgan. Great presentation. Great job of making something somewhat complicated pretty clear for us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, our next study session item is the Housing Action Plan Engagement Update. Yeah, it's been a minute. Yeah, welcome.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, hopefully. I don't run into issues. Wonderful. No issues this time. Great. I have some notes here, so I'm going to be reading through it because otherwise I'm going to go all over the place. So forgive me while I'm looking at the screen and looking at my notes. But as I said, good evening, Planning Commission. It's great to see you all again. It's been a while, and we're excited tonight to talk about the Housing Action Plan update. So I will give some brief updates on where the work we've been doing since we spoke last time and where the direction that we're going in. So no action is required tonight. Tonight I'm just giving a status update, including next steps, and asking the Commission to consider the following questions on the next slide for discussion tonight. I can be presented brief, as I said, to allow us to have the majority of time for discussion. I won't read through all these slides, but these are the questions that I'm posing to the Commission tonight. You can also find these questions in your packet for reference as I go through my presentation. So the Housing Action Plan is an update to the 2018 Housing Strategy. For reference, here's a timeline of the Housing Action Plan efforts. Work began in September of 2024 with staff looking at the prior plan, current housing efforts, and taking guidance from the comp plan update, which wrapped up at the end of that year. Staff then presented a draft housing goals and objectives in January of 2025, which serves as a Housing Action Plan, the HAP's guiding document. We heard from both the Council and Planning Commission the importance of conducting community engagement throughout the creation of the Housing Action Plan. Staff then began the process of finding and hiring an engagement consultant. Burke was ultimately selected in midsummer, and after onboarding, began full community engagement in early fall of last year. The first phase engagement wrapped up at the end of last year, and the feedback collected from the community is now being used to create the first full draft of the Housing Action Plan, which is expected in May or June. The full draft of the Housing Action Plan will go up for discussion with City Council and Planning Commission during this time, followed by a summer blitz of community engagement in which the community will have a chance to review and comment on the full draft Housing Action Plan. So the Housing Action Plan has three components to it. The plan update itself, which is what I just described, and the updates to the Middle Housing and Affordable Housing Codes. The Middle Housing Code work wrapped up in December of last year, as you may remember, and the Affordable Housing Code route was updated for the first time in December as well. On the Affordable Housing Code work, staff is working on a second, more comprehensive update now, and we will bring that to the Planning Commission to the Council for discussion when we are ready. All these efforts are to align Bothell with recent state housing mandates and ensure Bothell has much needed affordable housing for all individuals in our community. Not pictured here and not applicable to this body, but important to mention nonetheless, is the update to the multifamily tax exemption, aka the MFTE program, which staff is now working on and hoping to complete by the end of July of this year. Paired with the code updates, addressing the affordability challenges are a core component of the Housing Action Plan efforts. Staff collected feedback from the community at public events, our online engagement platform, Engage Bothell, and through targeted focus groups in which residents voluntarily signed up to speak with staff. The feedback collected at these events and focus groups is helping staff shape that Housing Action Plan from reorganizing priorities to emphasizing priorities that align the most with the community's concerns and hopes. I won't go through all the key takeaways that I've heard at these focus groups and through public feedback, but some that I want to highlight that stood out to me and that will be interest to the commission relate to home sizes. Hearing that we want to have a diversity of home sizes for individuals at all stages of their life, that we want to make it easier for existing homeowners to build ADUs and DADUs in their properties, looking at creating full, complete walkable communities to create those homes, for those homes to be publicly accessible by public transit, and where individuals can live without the need for a vehicle, and looking at increase and streamline tenant protections for our renters, making sure that our tenant protections are easy to understand and easy to follow for everyone involved, from the tenant to the landlord and everyone in between. For further detail, including the takeaways from these efforts, you can look at the attachments in the agenda packet tonight. Next steps to recap, staff is now working on applying the feedback received to update the Housing Action Plan, which we expect to publish by June, just in time for a second round of engagement in the summer. Staff will present the full draft to the Council and Planning Commission during this time as well. As I mentioned, staff is also looking at introducing new land incentives, as well as revising the MFT program as part of a second update to the Affordable Housing Code. In conclusion, no action is required tonight. Given what I have presented tonight and what was included in your packet, I pose the following questions for discussion tonight.
Commissioners? Commissioner Jones?
Thank you so much for this presentation and for the continued work, and also big congratulations for the extensive outreach. I mean, with the exception of a few groups, a couple of groups and lessons learned, which are always going to happen, it really appears to be a pretty thorough effort. One of the questions you have is about the goals and objectives and should anything be included or not. I just wanted to ask about, I noticed that there wasn't a goal relative to sort of a balance or between owner-occupied versus rental-occupied priorities, and especially one that's informed by community input to guide choices. We've talked about this a little bit before, and I know it stems more from the affordable housing part, but the affordable housing is part of the overall housing action plan. And so curious about that goal. Also, it seemed as if in the feedback, folks brought up this need for human scale, green space, and that balance between development, which we need, and green space, human scale development, etc. So I didn't see a goal related to that aspect and how it blends in. I have a couple other questions, but maybe we could address those.
Yeah, so to address the second question, that is something we can definitely consider adding to the draft goals and objectives. We definitely want to be careful on how we wordsmith it, because we don't want to make the implication that the growth that we're seeing now is not human scale.
Exactly.
But we do want to recognize that in some of the, and I don't want to steal my colleague's Cameron's thunder, but in the downtown plan, we heard a lot, in the downtown focus groups, I hear a lot about making sure that our buildings in downtown and citywide, of course, are built at this human scale. So all to say, I think it's definitely a great suggestion, something I'm interested in adding. I would have to work with my staff to make sure that we are wordsmithing in a way that does not hamper growth or direct growth to be in a way that doesn't help us meet our housing targets.
Agreed, absolutely agreed. I think a lot of care is needed there, but it will be. I think the city will be responsive to the feedback you're getting. If we ask for feedback and we get feedback like this, we need to be responsive to it.
Yes.
Especially with such a thorough community outreach program. Are there, in terms of additional groups, I think you asked about that, are there additional groups that you might want to be talking with? It seemed as if it seems as if we need more input from seniors. It didn't seem as if there are some issues that came up that are relevant to seniors, but it didn't seem as if we had enough feedback from that group. And then, are there any groups that you could meet with that focus on affordable housing? I didn't notice that in the focus groups, but maybe you did meet with some, because that seems to be another area as well. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention was, because you asked for any other programs or incentives not listed. I can't necessarily point to a whole list, but I'm sure you're probably familiar with Sightline Institute, and I was wondering if you've been following some of their programs, because they have been comparing and contrasting the policies and incentives that, say, Portland, Oregon has used compared to Seattle, and what's been working, what hasn't been working. And I would just encourage you to look at and look at some of that benchmarking, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely want to reach out to more of the senior community and more to the renter community. Also, while balancing the communities that we haven't heard from much, that we want to also reach out to. That includes young individuals under 35 and renters under 35, and also the youth, well, I guess the 18 and over college student population that are going to be coming of age and be looking for housing as well. And so wanting to find a balance where we're hearing from all these groups and making sure that not one group is overrepresented in our engagement, because I want to make sure that the feedback is truly cohesive, that we're getting that and not lopsided to one group.
Other questions, comments? Commissioner Lever?
Thank you, Commissioner Lever. Also, thank you so much for the presentation. And I've been lucky enough to be able to participate in some of your activities, so thank you so much for that.
Great to have you.
Yeah, thank you. I want to preface my comment by acknowledging how difficult it is to do outreach and engagement, and how difficult it is to capture feedback when we know it exists but it's not given to us unless it's time to say yes or no to something. So I want to make sure that's really clear. When it comes to the engagement component, I often see, the numbers may not be statistically significant for the size of our city, and the recommendations that come forward go beyond that focus group. That's another kind of way of hearing, but it's just so comprehensive and methodic that I really wonder how you're going to go back to those that did come to those events, or even when it is like at the fairs that we're just like walking by, so that their feedback is kind of reiterated that it was heard, because I do see this huge disconnect and almost that mistrust of, well, I am saying something and it may not translate into what I thought it was going to say. And then I oftentimes think, well, what is it that you're saying? Because it's just so abstract when it comes to a focus group of this caliber, when there's no recommendation per se, but it's more like vision driven. So with the consultant that you are working with, can you tell us more about the next steps in terms of feedback loops, and also whether or not there are collaborations which you already identified here in terms of really going to places where people are already and where they may be more prone to share their feedback, like school meetings or the senior center or other places? Like, how is that going to look like for the next iteration?
Great questions. So for the first one, closing the loop has been something that we're prioritizing throughout this engagement process from the very beginning. Before we even created the idea of the focus groups, before we even created our engagement plans, we knew that closing the loop was something that we had to do, because as you said correctly, that if we're not going back to the community after we got their feedback, that creates a cycle of mistrust. And so when we closed the focus groups, I sent out an email to our participants letting them know that here's a packet, here's all the feedback that we heard, please go through it. And I got a lot of good responses from that email saying, thank you for sending this, can I see through the notes, when can I see the presentation? And so that's a good strategy for how we close individual engagement efforts. And then when it comes to the entire plan itself, we're going to be working with our communications folks upstairs on the fourth floor to get the word out that the plan is at this stage, that we are closing that we're almost getting to adoption, that all this feedback that we shared has helped us shape this plan. We're going to work in the communications team to really get the word out so that people aren't forgetting that this effort has happened. And to your second question about where we're going to be in the summer, our engagement consultants are finding events that we can be at, to table, to get more eyeballs on our engagement. And we're also thinking about more unique ways to get the word out and get more feedback from people, whether that be attending individual organizations to present to their members, or go in apartment communities to have a, I guess, pop-up planner, I should say, to just be there and talk about the housing action plan. We're figuring that out. The engagement consultant is helping us staff that as needed. Yes.
May I? Commissioner Lever, thank you so much. That actually like prompted me to provide some suggestions or ideas that I have. So when it comes to like social media, I have seen that oftentimes when there's something that's put out there in terms of this is what we heard and people reacting to it, it will be great to see how the information can be shared more like posts, just to see what kind of feedback you get and incorporate it as part of the feedback, because as unfortunately what we see a lot of the negative comments sometimes, and we definitely want to capture that so we can mitigate their fears through the implementation process. And the other one is around the feedback component. I remember that email, so thank you for that. And then I just thought perhaps it would be helpful for really reaching out to the target population through the entire process and reminding them, hey, there's an item tonight. So they could also, be another like outlet to remind them that they can actually be part of this forum, and perhaps they will be maybe that they just needed that extra email to see that there was something on the agenda that we already know piqued their interest. So maybe something to consider.
Great feedback. Thank you.
So that also reminded me to ask about the fact that you didn't have very good representation from the student population, the college student population. And it sounded as if the consultant was maybe approaching them during a break or something like that, a school break. If the next feedback sessions are going to happen in the summer, that's also going to be a problem. And so some of the ways to get good feedback from students, a representative group of students, there are certain professors, for example, who teach policy courses. They would probably love to have, someone from your team come, or the consultant team come to a class session and conduct sort of a focus group with 38, 48 students, right? Or the residential halls, even though it only represents a very small portion of the students, still their resident hall coordinators, their directors will probably be happy to entertain something in the evening with the students. And then the last thing is there is student government, and the student government has, they meet regularly, and you have to plan ahead to get on their agenda. But they are the student government for the campus. And Cascadia has an equivalent one to Bothell. Those would be good bodies to go in front of and get feedback from students.
I appreciate the feedback, definitely. Look into student government. One of them, members of the student government from UW Bothell, was one of our participants. And
Excellent.
he mentioned the same ideas. And so
Excellent.
our staff is working, our engagement consultants are working to get those connections going. We understanding that, yes, the school calendar does present some unique challenges, but we can figure out ways to still get the input from them.
I do think that's an important demographic to reach out to. I do recall quite some time ago, we looked at some demographic data in the Country Village area, and there was a distinct dip in the number of people in their 20s around, because it's just very tough. And I can tell you, we raised 3 children in Bothell. They're all in their 30s now. They don't live here. None of their friends live here. It's just not affordable for that group. And, if you want a well-rounded community, you want those people here. So
Thank you.
keep reaching out.
I appreciate it. Will do.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
All right, I've got some comments. First of all, really thorough. I read through this today. Great list of goals and objectives. A lot of the things I would bring up are in here. But I want to drill down on some a little bit. As someone who has been pushing for Bothell to be a more friendly place for particularly smaller developers, and there's a heavy focus on that, both at the state level, county level, city level, now at all levels, like with middle housing and then all the state laws that have been put into place. There's a heavy emphasis and a prioritization of infill, smaller sites and stuff. In my experience as a professional doing this work, I feel like our development services and planning departments need to start having really maybe tough conversations with Public Works about the costs around infrastructure, frontage improvements, utility exaction, things like that, that are causing small projects to not pencil out. I mean, I personally have projects that are just dying on the vine because they can make a building pencil out, which is really hard to do for 8, 10, 6, 12 units. It's way harder than 60 or 600. And then you have to do an outsized amount of sidewalks are great, but like, oh, you got to do new sewer, and you've got to rebuild the ADA sidewalks or the ADA ramps, and you've got to do all this wonderful stuff that everybody wants, but it just kills the project. And so it's like, yeah, we all love that stuff, but can we meet you halfway? And that's in here. It's, you know, it's brought up in was it foster affordable housing development, and where is it? Affordable housing for all sorry, I was making notes from this, but it's in here. More housing types. We're getting help from things like as far as like buildings themselves. Smaller elevators this year that just passed. It's going to take a few years till we get those, but not having to put a stretcher in is going to make smaller elevators more feasible. Scissor stairs, single stair buildings, that was done a few years ago. We're going to finally codify that, it sounds like, as the city, our building officials into that. That's going to make as far as the building code aspects go, not land use, make the buildings more affordable to build. So that's like cool. The building itself is going to get a little more affordable. But then we have a role as a city saying, okay, could we get by here? You know, is it within the nexus of proportionality and all the the lawful terms that we use to say, like there was a project, I know it's pretty high profile among staff with Mr. Buffard up on West Hill about the amount of frontage and improvements you'd have to do a few units in his back lot. And I think it's a really good test case for are we asking too much? Because a lot of these projects, again, just to reiterate, will pencil out if they don't have to do substantial amounts of public infrastructure work. And so that's also where something like LCLIP comes in. I think it's really exciting because some of these projects would float. We'd have 6, 8 new, maybe even affordable or naturally more affordable market rate rental places, or even homes with the new condo laws going into effect and everything that people could buy, maybe even accessible. So we're seeing some excitement there. But they're like, oh my gosh, I got to do $250,000 in new sewer lining, and maybe the sewer's fine or good enough, and trees and sidewalks and street lights and benches and all this wonderful stuff. Again, everybody wants it. But, the project just died. Just don't get anything. They're just not going to do it. So that's where Public Works, they have high standards. They want what the city engineering details ask for. They're great. They make a wonderful built environment, but they're very expensive. So I think we need to reevaluate, like, do we want the housing? Do we have to hit all our housing targets? What's holding us back? What's the new hurdle? Zoning was the hurdle. Now I think a lot of these things that are outside the project itself, beyond the building or in the public realm that we have to do as part of a project, are really holding back projects now. And it's sort of the elephant in the room. I don't think the city even, sees a lot of these until after they don't see them anymore after pre-app, because people see oh, I can't afford that. And to our credit as a city, we had people come and say, oh, they couldn't afford the frontage improvements for like DADUs and ADUs and stuff. And MAC was one of them a few years ago, and we changed the codes to make those more attainable to build. And so we really have risen to the occasion when we needed to. So I don't want to beat that one too hard, but that's just something I'm seeing that's already very evident, that our goals and aspirations and plans for the number of units we want to build, and all the wonderful development regulations we've changed and zoning and stuff are starting to butt heads with what we require in the public realm and how much it costs to build. It's already expensive, really expensive to build housing, but then when you have to do a whole bunch of stuff that's connected to it, even as wonderful as it is, we just have to really start to look at that. I brought this up before, and we have MFTE, but Sightline, to speak about Sightline, like Commissioner Jones brought up, wrote a lot about funded inclusionary zoning. That's one of the ways we're going to get deep restricted housing in Bothell. Developers aren't really probably going to do it on voluntarily the way we've got it set up in Bothell, which is admirable. We use a carrot rather than a stick, and I don't think the stick's going to work either, because once again, developers just aren't going to do it on smaller projects, which is what we're pushing, unless they find that they can get incentivized to not lose money on those units. Because right now, most inclusionary zoning projects just don't work. You have to have a really big project. And even then, it's always the people paying market rate who are incentivizing the non-market rate units. You might be able to do that on a 200, 300 unit project, but not a 20 unit or 10 unit. And certainly not for sale. They don't pencil out. And Arch has been doing numbers on that stuff too, and it's pretty challenging. So I would say, again, maybe it's an LCLIP thing or something like that. That we start to look at funded inclusionary zoning. I think you'd find a lot of these infill projects to be a lot more palatable to small developers if they knew that they weren't going to, that they were going to be made whole on offering reduced rental costs, because they're not going to start the project otherwise. That was my last point, is that, I mean, we could commit whole hog to the LCLIP, Transfer Development Rights Program, and say, all right, what kind of wonderful fairy dust can we sprinkle on some of these projects? Like, oh my gosh, we got to do the 60-foot of bike lane like at Mr. Bouffard's project, and it's going to be $250,000 or something like that or more. But we really like those units. So maybe we say, hey, you got that project needed was allowed to have more units. So maybe we'd say, hey, if you'll do 9 units, which are allowed, and not 3, then we'll help you pitch in. We'll pitch in like they would with a tax increment financing project or something, but on a smaller scale. We'll help you pay for all that infrastructure, so we can have the infrastructure, the bike lane, and your 9 units. But you got to hit the minimum or the maximum or whatever, and then we'll make that project feasible for you by paying for the frontage improvements, which seem like there are 2 ways to do frontage improvements through history, and people in the civic realm should correct me, but City of Seattle and a lot of cities traditionally wouldn't have done impact fees and stuff like that. They would build sidewalks, they would build sewers, water systems and everything, and tax the people en masse as a city, and then you would go buy the lot from a private person and you put a building on it, and your sidewalks are built by the city, whatever. Whereas we say, developers, you build it all, and then we'll own it when you're done. And so it adds to the cost of the project. So I think we're pretty far down the road of developer paying for it all. But we might need to find some hybrid if we really want to meet our housing goals and say, hey, is there some way we can come in as a city and help defray some of those costs for the really expensive and yet wonderful public realm that we need to build? Because if we just rely on developers to always do it, we're not going to see it in the volume and the numbers we want. Sorry it took so long, but I've been thinking a lot about this. I've just been seeing projects die, and it's really discouraging. I think this is going to come to a head soon.
Commissioner Jones.
This is just a quick addendum to what Commissioner Westerbeck said. So the people who live in Bothell right now love the fact that we do have wonderful amenities, and we design in a certain way that maintains aesthetics and values the environment and things like that. So I think it is something that's valuable to the people who live here, and I imagine it's valuable to people who want to live here as well. I can't imagine it isn't. And in my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if the pie stays the same in terms of the amount of dollars available, those growth targets and the affordable housing and the middle housing just isn't going to happen. But this sounds like by having the potential to have extra infrastructure funding, we could actually grow the pie if the city is able to support some of these costs. I think that's such an exciting idea in targeted areas tied to affordable housing or affordable adjacent housing, those types of goals. So it's really interesting, and it potentially could be very creative. So it's just an exciting opportunity for the city.
Chair, if I could respond real quick.
Yes,
just
please.
to the last couple of comments. So the LCLIP program does, while it does provide a revenue source, it is limited, and it does rely on what's within the capital facility plan and the comp plan, what's within that project list that we went through and prioritized. The dollars, over time, they might add up to a good amount, but it's incremental year by year. So it's definitely not a huge pot of money that can, I don't want anyone to think that it's millions and millions and millions of dollars. It will support filling in holes in transportation projects that the city is going to seek out to do. But then I do want to remind you of the transportation impact fee adjustments and the one chart that Boyd brought up that showed, okay, if we do this transportation impact fee reduction, it creates a gap. So that there already is a gap in the city-funded, long-term plan that we felt that we could adjust and kind of work through that. We see the LCLIP program as an opportunity to maybe fill a few of those holes, but it's definitely just a few small holes with some projects in those designated areas that we want to make sure are sort of high targets for the largest number of units to get the largest amount of benefit. That's something that we'll work through with Morgan to make sure we can come with, when we talk about LIPAs and where those areas will be, what could be an example case, because we want to make sure we come with a good example of here's what a project actually could look like, here's what it would look like for number of units, here's what the costs would be for them to actually pay for the units out there in the counties, and so there's still a cost to that would be added on for the developer to get the extra units to then go into the opportunity for the funding in the future, but to offset all development of public infrastructure would be impossible, just to put it bluntly.
Thank you. Commissioner Lever.
Thank you, Commissioner Lever here. I have an idea, I suppose, and okay, let me just have the idea. So when it comes to affordable housing, and again, that seems to have such a negative connotation in the community in terms of these scary people who are coming or need the affordable housing. When it comes to making it work for the developers, really understanding who are those potential home buyers or even renters, I was kind of curious, and you don't have to answer the question right now, but when it comes to city employees or teachers, firefighters, and so on, are they, is everyone able to live here? I just remember that there are other cities where you can't really live in the city that you work because it's too expensive. And if so, how can we develop a program that it is targeted for employees that we definitely want to make sure that they're part of the makeup of the city and that can become a tenant right away? So then, and then I was thinking, okay, from my housing experience, we see the waiting list for the housing programs and that are funded federally. There are thousands and thousands of people, right? But you have a very specific criteria and you know who's in the waiting list. And if we actually knew that, Scarlett is in the waiting list, she's not so scary, maybe kind of gaining that momentum that we need to, when the projects do come forward or when we need to make those hard decisions, that we actually have that audience that said, I've been in the wait list for the last 5 years and I'm really looking forward to moving in there. And have you explored anything like that in terms of home ownership for employees?
It was very kind of noble of you to think of us city employees. But I will say, so you're jumping a few steps ahead, but once an affordable housing unit is created, we partner with ARCH to market the unit, administer the covenant of that unit. And from my conversation with ARCH, the way I understand how they select applicants to live in those units, they have a criteria that each applicant has to submit, an application that each applicant has to submit. That application is graded on a criteria. One of the criteria is, does that person live in the community that they are applying for an affordable housing unit? So in your example of a city employee, they work in the community, do they work in the community they're applying for a unit in? So a city employee example, if they were applying for a unit here in Bothell and they work with Bothell, that would give them an extra point in the application. And this application is graded through several metrics that I'm not 100% familiar with, but it's basically meant that the highest scoring applicants will get priority in the affordable housing unit.
Thank you for that. And I actually like thinking more on the design piece of it, because when it comes to the engagement component, and similar to what you shared earlier, like I have heard many stories where like, oh, I wish my children could live here, and or even my own story which I shared, like I feel like I got lucky that my home is just the tiniest one. I'm like, how did I find this? It's just literally like I think we're the smallest one. It has to be that I was, we're able to move in, and we know that there's this need, but we just have this idea of who that may be. And then when it comes to the feedback, you have 25 people, which is, again, like is not statistically significant for the city. Relevant, very relevant, and we have other avenues where we get feedback, but it still feels so foreign to to people. And then when I think about captive audience, I really, like, I don't know how many employees we have here or how many teachers we have. Like, there's actually like a captive audience that we could tap into and really design for as you create it. So by the time you get to the implementation piece, that's the whole human-centered design component come into place. And I really think, as I'm looking at the buildings go up, and I don't want to get all dark over here with the state of the world, but I'm like, if, anything, like we need to just build these resilience communities, and it would be wonderful that we really took under consideration the people who are working here. Like, the yoga teachers that I know that are driving from like God knows where, like far. Because just I'm like, oh, you come all the way, for just like a class. So I really think that we have an opportunity to do things slightly different that are outside the scope of the regular, so that we can get the feedback that we know it exists, and then have that population that will help us mitigate the NIMBYism that we know it exists. So
Makes sense. I understand where you're getting at, and yeah, I definitely appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
And I'd like to pick up a little bit on what Commissioner Westerbeck said. On its face, having the developer pay for the improvements in front of their development seems simple and right and easy, and yeah, let's do that. But I bet all of us could point to segments of sidewalk or development that are disconnected from anything, and quite likely will be a very long time till they get connected. Was that the best use of those dollars? Yeah. And, should we prioritize certain areas? And, I've been skeptical of fee in lieu in other instances, but looking at a reasonable fee, having a designated source, and okay, have that money go to that, may make a lot more sense. And it just might be time to re-examine that. We've got experience doing it this way. Is it the best way? Let's take a look. So I suggest we consider that. Any other comments on this topic, Commissioner Westerbeck?
No, I agree. Just to pick up on that, like a couple of the cases I've seen, there really should be like a sidewalk connection. That's actually pretty affordable. But then to do like a full road section rebuild just for 60 feet, like you're talking about, like, oh, that's a pretty poor use of money. Mm-hmm. Like the one I was talking about, again, I'll bring it up, the one with Mr. Buffard's project. To get into the weeds a tiny bit, but I think you'll understand this. It's like a mile-long road or something like that. And we, as a planning commission, helped put in place the bike plan that has a very aspirational road section there. And it would require realignment and tearing out of some really nice sidewalks from 2021 that were put in for a housing development there. So it's sort of hip bone connects to leg bone. So they were going to have to do a significant amount of rework it's only 5 years old, just because it's in the manual. And this is how it's done. That's 60 feet. But the crazy thing to me is, and this is not the only instances of this could happen all over the city. You'd be, as Commissioner Kiernan said, you'd be redoing this 60 feet to be the beautiful Lamborghini. But that particular road has a whole bunch of developments done in the last 10 or 15 years. No one's going to redevelop those for 50, 60, 70, 80 years. So those are never going to get the bike lane until the city does it. And it's just ridiculous to think that we're going to connect up that whole mile. So I think there's places like that all over the city where we have to, like you said, have a more logical standard applied. Can we put in the sidewalk? Can we get the housing? And we can, like you say, you got to contribute to fee in lieu, or you have to meet you have to build to the maximum number of units so we get the most benefit out of this, since you're not going to build the bike lane or whatever. So I think some of these conversations could be had. So sorry to beat a dead horse there, but I really think that is a very good point.
Could I ask for just a point of clarification for staff? So And we definitely would need to bring Public Works into the conversation around any strategies around the right-of-way. But is the conversation here looking at inclusion of strategies within the Housing Action Plan that look at how how affordable housing projects interface with the public right-of-way, or is this any housing? Because there's a significant difference when we're talking about market rate, traditional development types that are not providing any affordable housing units, with deed-restricted affordable units, or those that do provide deed-restricted affordable units that are achieving the income band goals, which are very, very high within our 0 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 80% bands. We're not going to have a problem achieving the above 80% in the next 20 years. Staff are not worried about achieving the maybe 1,500 units in that realm. It's really that focus on those that do have deed restrictions below 80%. So if that's kind of where this is going, we can definitely circle back, include Public Works on what opportunities might be there. Again, strategies are definitely just that. They're not binding. It's not in the comp plan, but it's ways for us to make sure we can see what's plausible. What are some opportunities we could seek out? Is it for finding additional, grant resources for projects that we can apply towards right-of-way improvements to really cut that pain for a project? But just wanted to make sure we were clear on kind of where this was going. All housing, or affordable housing, those that include deed-restricted affordable housing units.
Commissioner Robson?
This is highly irregular. I need to excuse myself from the meeting. So are you guys good with a quorum right now?
We are not taking any action.
Okay, so we're solid. I'm so
gonna assume we're
sorry.
okay.
I need to.
We are fine. Four is quorum, so we'd be okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Start your mic.
Thank you.
I'll speak to that just briefly since I partly brought it up. I would think we'd start with deed restricted, but that when there is a conversation around, again, I'm going to bring up Mr. Buffard's project just because it's such a glaring example. When it does look like you're doing really extraordinary, maybe beyond the nexus and proportionality, I know that can always be argued, for a non-deed restricted project, that we would have an opportunity to have a conversation about that and say, would we rather put a condition on this, like, yeah, you can do 80% and up, but you can't just do 3, you've got to do 9 or something like I mentioned. So we might have some sort of new program we say, yeah, it's not deed restricted, but we can see, like, no one's going to build that that frontage improvement on your street for maybe decades. So can we stop it at the sidewalk, but in exchange, you can't do a minimum. You've got to really put some more housing into the project. So I know it's a wishy-washy answer, but I would think we could get to that in time. But at first, it would be one of the examples I think of is someone might, like myself, might say, I want to do 10 units here on this project, and I'm downtown, and I really would like to do 60%, 80% AMI. But what's killing me is I can't afford to put in the lights and the sidewalks and the street trees, and I can't reline the sewer, and I can't do all the stuff that's outside my property, because it's just makes the project not work at 80% AMI, 60% AMI. But if the city could find a way to do that themselves, I'll bring you 10 deed restricted units. And I know we find other ways to do that, multifamily tax exemption and extra height and so forth. Sometimes those things just aren't feasible. So instead it'd be like, it'd be guys great if I could just worry about building the building and making a walkway out to the sidewalk. And then you guys worry about the rest of it, kind of like we would have done 100 years ago. So maybe I'm, again, saying the same thing in a different way, but that'd be amazing. The developer would be like, I got it. I got you 10 units at 70% AMI. I'm going to build them right there. We've got an agreement with you guys to build the sidewalks and put in the streetlights. Let's go build.
Commissioner Jones?
My feedback is that we should start looking at this in, or at least exploring it in terms of the deed restricted affordable units. I go back to the comment that the consultant from Eco Northwest said. He said that, there are a couple different ways that you could go about looking at this infrastructure funding. And I know you're not suggesting this would be the only source of funding. There might be other grants, et cetera. But just using that example of, well, you could just say, okay, your overall capital infrastructure budget increased. Well, that might lead to projects that were never even on there that have nothing to do with the affordable housing. Or you could do something that was more targeted. I think it would be interesting to look at something that's more targeted for affordable housing that takes some of the costs off the developer to incentivize that type of project moving forward. So I think I don't know if it will pencil out, but I think it would be interesting to look at.
Commissioner Lever?
And then complementing that, I kind of think of the scenarios, like if we really look at, okay, what is the demand that we know exists, because we know it happens, and then it's easy to start with those that you can really like target and ask, right? Now I'm like really curious to know how many of the city staff live here and how many of them would like to live here, or any of the other, people who work in the city, because I would love to be able to work where I live, and then if that is the case, like how can we really better understand what that looks like, and then how can even the city support those efforts so that we can really start somewhere with scenarios that are that could be really an incentive, because you have the target population, and again, that almost like building that waiting list.
Commissioner Jones?
Just one more quick note, and I think we all realize this, but just because people can only afford a deed-restricted affordable housing project or to live in one of those, doesn't mean that they also don't want accessible bike lanes. And in the long term, they don't want to have to deal with sewers that collapse in 5 years because they weren't upgraded and things like that. So I do think we also want the folks in those developments to have similar assets that the rest of the population has, those over 80. And if the only way to make that happen is from another, making the pie bigger in terms of funding, then let's try to figure out how to do that. So.
Commissioner Westbeck here. Oh, real quick. I did want to give the city a little props. We did this, 15 years ago or something. Had projects benefit from the Horse Creek drainage district, whatever we call it. You have to pay into it, so there's a cost. But the cool thing is the city went in and they did this massive infrastructure project, so which meant little projects like I've been doing didn't have to do really infeasible on-site stormwater detention and treatment, which would have, again, killed most of the projects I've been involved with and here and elsewhere. So being able to pay, $25 grand or whatever for a small project and just go into that city provided system. Granted, that was a massive infrastructure project, I'm sure, but that's just an example of like, hey, we'll do some heavy lifting. You pay into the system, but it facilitates you getting this done, and all you have to do is pipe over to it. That was a real help, and I think it's helped, more than just myself downtown. I think that whole Horse Creek system, assuming it's worked out for the city, has been a real boon. So we've done it before. We've done a version of this where we kind of did some of the heavy lifting as a city, and then people could buy into it.
All right. Well, you got a lot of feedback.
Really, lots of fit. I appreciate it. Thank you all so much.
Well, thank you for your presentation. You clearly stimulated a lot of thought from us. So we do appreciate your coming and look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right.
Thank you.
Look forward to it. Have a good night.
Thank you, Senior Planner Sosa. Appreciate it.
So our final study session item for today is the Downtown Sub-Area Plan Update. Welcome.
Good to see you all again. I'll get the PowerPoint pulled up here. Okay. So my update tonight will be very similar to the last presentation, but focus a little more on our recent engagement work on the downtown sub-area plan update, and just some a brief summary of kind of what we've been hearing from participants and how that'll inform the plan development. So just in terms of general updates on the project, I know it's been a while since we've been before you all with an update on this particular project. We are still in the inventorying existing conditions and kind of visioning phase, really focusing on the engagement work, which is really where a bulk of the information informing the plan, comes from. And so our goal is to have a lot of that wrapped up over the next couple of months, and an initial draft for review in July. So shortly after we have a draft of the housing action plan available, and then very similar to that project, doing a bigger push over the summer to make people aware of the plan, give them an opportunity to review and get more feedback from the community on did we hit the mark, or what gaps do we need to fill? So one of the accomplishments over the past couple of months is we recruited and formed an ambassador work group for this project, very similar to the advisory committee we formed for the climate action plan. It's a community-driven group of people that voluntarily applied to serve as ambassadors. So the main purpose of this group is to provide ongoing input on the plan itself and our engagement approach to the broader community, as well as to help connect us with each of their networks. So this opportunity was widely promoted across all of the city's communication channels, on our website and Engage Bothell, listservs, social media. We worked with Burke to do in-person tabling at the library and other locations around downtown, as well as to do some door-to-door outreach, handing out flyers to different downtown businesses and apartment buildings to solicit interest. And then as part of this recruitment process as well, Burke identified a number of initial stakeholders and conducted 10 interviews, the summary of which I included in your packet. The main purpose of those interviews were to establish new partnerships, gather initial input on downtown topics and priorities, and then to also ask these participants if they would be willing to serve on the ambassador group as well. And so we did receive a large amount of interest in this group. We received over 40 plus applications, which exceeded our initial goal of about 10 to 15 participants. So due to the high level of interest, we ended up selecting about 24 participants. And the criteria that our consultant used to narrow that list down was affiliation to downtown, so whether they live, work, visit, or study here in Bothell, their availability and ability to attend the scheduled meetings, and then ability to represent and engage diverse communities in downtown. So we held their first meeting last month, which was great success. At the first meeting, we did a walking tour of downtown. We provided them all with a brief orientation, and then a bulk of the meeting was spent walking around downtown and identifying areas or common challenges throughout downtown through a photo voice tour, where the ambassadors were encouraged to take photos and provide notes regarding them, whether they're pros or cons or opportunity areas within downtown. So we got a lot of great photos from that first meeting. I've included a couple of those up on your screen here. And so what we did with all of those photos that were collected by the ambassador group was compiled them into kind of common themes and topic areas and collages, and brought those back during the second meeting to kind of share out some key themes that we saw that came out of those. And building off of that, we held their second meeting just last week. And so that meeting focused on breaking up into small groups and really diving into a couple of the key topic areas in a bit more detail. So we focused those conversations around housing and development, transportation and mobility, and then public space and activation, because those were some common themes that we saw come out of the photos. And then in addition to the ambassador work group, we've been doing some public versions of these same walking tours of downtown. So it provides an opportunity for other residents to explore downtown with city staff, discuss what's working, what could be better and what we need to address in the plan. So I've included a map of kind of the key locations that we've tried to hit on these walking tours, including City Hall, Festival Street, Main Street, Triangle Junction, and Bothell Way, Park at Bothell Landing, and then some of the more recent development along 102nd and 104th Street. So our first discovery walk was on Saturday. Yes, Chair Kiernan was there. It was a pretty good turnout considering the weather. We had about 15 participants, both long-term residents as well as some newer ones that mentioned that this was a great opportunity to meet some neighbors, learn some more about downtown, which was good to see. And so got to hear a lot of good feedback on that walking tour as well. We are going to be hosting a second public walk tomorrow evening. So we tried to provide kind of one on Saturday for those that work during the week, and then provide another option on a weekday evening. So that'll be tomorrow night from 6 to 7 p.m. We have had a large amount of interest thus far. We have about 40 registrants on the Engage Bothell website for that event tomorrow. And then our social media posts have been getting a lot of traction with over 200 likes and over 100 comments with a varying degree of feedback on, common issues that people see downtown or things that they would like to see downtown. So we are working with our communications team to pull those, like you mentioned earlier, and kind of factor that into our feedback, as well as we're kind of assembling all of this feedback that we're getting in these different avenues. Yes, so we'll meet at City Hall at 6 o'clock. We'll start here. Given the limited sunlight, we'll probably just give a brief welcome and introduction, and then start our walk, and then kind of go from there. Great. Awesome. Looking forward to seeing you all there. So to summarize some of the common themes that we've been hearing, both on the public walks and from the ambassador group, in those small group discussions last week, were, I think, things that we have heard during previous engagement processes, and I think ones that were highlighted during our housing conversation tonight as well, that there is some public concern around some of the pace and direction of recent development downtown. People aren't a huge fan of the larger block apartment buildings, and so I think one of the key questions that we'll have to wrestle with as part of the downtown plan is, with the anticipated growth, how do we retain that charm of downtown while accommodating future growth? So I think that'll be something that we dig into a little more down the line. And we are looking at having a public workshop or charrette around the time that the draft plan comes out. So we'll have an opportunity then to really dig into design elements and ways that we could update the code to really make sure that's reflected in future development. There's concerns around, affordability and displacement, and then common comments around, the number of vacant lots or underutilized properties throughout downtown, which create some connectivity issues, particularly between, say, the Main Street area and Bothell Way, or between Main Street and UW Bothell, just different hubs of activity that are kind of disconnected because of that. In terms of transportation or mobility, parking has come up a lot. There's a perceived lack of parking downtown. It seems like that is due to a combination of factors, both capacity in specific areas, but also making people aware of available parking. So some things that we heard in the small groups were that, the City Hall garage is a great asset, but it's unclear, what spots are reserved for city staff, what hours they're unavailable to the public, what hours the garage itself is open. And so just making the public more aware that, we have substantial parking here available that is close by a number of restaurants and other locations, as well as the other parking locations throughout downtown. But part of it also is our street parking, and we've heard that there is some spillover from residential parking, people overstaying or staying in parking places, and a lack of enforcement. So it's kind of multiple factors that are contributing to that. People really highlighted that they love the access to trails and green space downtown, but that there are some pockets or gaps in our existing bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. I think more so on the bicycle infrastructure side in particular. So there are some planned improvements along Bothell Way that are coming, as well as Beardsley Boulevard. But, really identifying those additional areas where we need to improve those connections. Crossings came up a lot, and public safety. So a number of areas where people have identified that safety improvements are needed. And then I mentioned some of the connectivity issues as well. And then public space and activation. We've heard a lot that awareness about the multiple privately owned public spaces that are downtown are not well known. And so really thinking about, okay, how do we advertise that better and utilize these spaces that are already existing and that, developers have put money into, making sure that those are utilized spaces that people know about. As I mentioned, people noted that access to nature is important. And so how do we retain that as downtown continues to grow? Common theme of wanting to expand public art and really using that as a way to help activate our downtown. I think similar to prior engagement, feedback on Main Street pedestrianization has been mixed. So I don't know if we've come away with any new takeaways there in particular. And then a lot of great suggestions for additional improvements to activate those spaces, Main Street as well as Triangle Junction and some of the other main areas of downtown. So in terms of next steps for the project, we will be continuing to work with the Ambassador Work Group and community members to finish the existing conditions inventory, identifying those key challenges and opportunities, and then begin brainstorming policy solutions. And then we will come back with a draft plan around July, which is also when we are looking to host a public workshop or charrette to dig into some of these topics in a bit more detail and get that feedback on the draft plan as well. And then we plan on returning to Planning Commission in June when we have that draft available. And then we'll do a big push over the summer to raise awareness about the draft and gather additional feedback, and then come back in the fall for the final review and adoption process. So with that, I will turn it over to you all for any questions.
Commissioner comments?
Great.
Lever, and then Commissioner
Oh, sorry, you go
Westerbeck.
first.
Commissioner Lebert, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the engagement that's been put into this effort, and I really, I'm so happy to see the response rate as well. My comment was around the other programming that currently exists. So I've seen other things that are like the pop-up shops and other things. So how does that coordination look like in terms of kind of getting even the feedback of existing, like even the businesses that I think I saw the focus group that you had, but there's just so many other, I guess, target populations as well. How are they engaged in this process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are kind of receiving feedback through a variety of avenues. There's a lot of overlap across multiple projects, like you mentioned. So the Pop Shops work, our housing action plan, as well as the downtown plan specifically. So we have been working with Burke and our consultants to make sure that we identify those overlaps where they are and how we can fold that, feedback into this plan. And then for this project in particular, as part of Burke's stakeholder engagement process, identifying those different categories like local businesses and other groups, they've made sure to reach out to them directly. So as part of the Ambassador Work Group recruitment, but in addition, some of those one-on-one interviews, other door-to-door outreach, and then we're gathering broader feedback at the in-person events, which kind of collect a wider array of participants and feedback.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thanks. First of all, love the Ambassador Work Group. It's great. Some names are recognized, at least on the interviewee list. So fantastic effort. I'm excited to, hopefully I remember my calendar goes off tomorrow night and I can jump out of work and get over there to walk with you guys. But fantastic. So thank you. Just excited to see that. Just wanted to say congratulations on getting that going and getting some great feedback. I do look forward to getting to the policy. I know I emailed Deputy Director Gates about the, Gates? That's it, Getz. There we go, Getz. I know we had that discussion once. I'm trying to get his name right for anybody who's watching the video. About that, because I've, me, I'm laser focused on what's it going to take to get the built environment we are seeking in downtown. And so I've got a lot of comments around like design guidelines and regulations and so forth as they pertain to how we build and what the shape of things are that guides how we build in downtown. So I'm excited to dig into that when the time comes. So that's all. Just eager to see this progress, and I'm glad we're getting a lot of feedback from a wide variety of people on this. Appreciate your work, Cameron.
Well, I did take the walking tour, and I'm going to recognize Cameron for the miserable conditions. It was a nasty day, but we soldiered on, so it was good. And it was interesting to hear some of the comments. We'd be standing in front of public open space, and people had no idea. So, it's clearly an issue. Parking is also most definitely an issue, and we should recognize most of Bothell is not within walking distance of downtown. That's just a reality. I mean, I'm 2 miles away, and I'll walk occasionally, but not all the time. It's a long way. There are real consistent comments, both, pretty much any public social media you look at, it comes up. And, there are some things we could probably do. Construction parking, I have experience with large construction projects, and you can require the contractor to have a parking plan. And you could designate a place over there where they can park and not grab city streets in front of their job. And I'm sure it would require some action to be able to do that, but that is a very specific step you could take to address.
The city does do that.
Yeah.
We have to do it for every project, just so you know.
Well, okay, but you do see people.
For sure. I'm just saying I've had to make multiple parking plans for projects. So.
Well, then let's move to the other issue of enforcement.
There we go.
Which, also clearly doesn't happen. I mean, there are challenges with enforcement. Everybody wants enforcement, but nobody wants to be enforced upon. But we're going to have to bite the bullet and deal with that. So, that's definitely something that has to be done. So, but again, thanks for being out there.
Yeah, no problem. You mentioned construction parking. I know for the election development in particular, we partnered with them on utilizing the paved area and city lots because a lot of vehicles in and out of that area and staging that needed to happen. So it is something that we try to work with developers on to make as least disturbing as possible during that process.
I'll make two more comments on walkability. I do walk my dog downtown a lot, and the lights on Bothell Way default don't walk. And if you're walking and you miss, if you don't push the button before the cycle ends, you're waiting a full cycle. And that gives a message that the cars get the priority. They're more important. I think that should be looked at. And the other thing that I've experienced is almost a death trap is the right on red, 522, 527. If there's a bus there and you're crossing, people whip through that right on red, and it's a risk. So.
Let me echo, having lived downtown now for 11 years, I've had so many close calls with right on red, and also people doing left turns from the turn lane and right into crosswalks. So, City of Seattle now has the no right turn on red. We should consider that because it's just a huge safety issue. So I'm just going to have to concur with that because I walk all over the place downtown, and it's a massive problem. And I think we have to deal with WashDOT with the timing, right? But I spend good considerable time of my week, feels like, waiting for those lights to. I know, see Commissioner Jones walking around downtown too, and that's a great point. Like the default. I mean, let's face it. As far as on the public record, I jaywalk all the time, even across 522 and 527, because there'll be no cars for an eighth of a mile, and you're just hanging out, waiting forever. So I just walk across. Don't even have to run, just walk across. So that's a problem. But I don't know how recalcitrant WashDOT has been to work with us on light timing. I've heard from council members that that's a very difficult prospect, but I feel like it's worth having a summit between Bothell and WashDOT on that issue.
Thanks for reminding me about that. I'm just going to put a plug in for that pedestrian bike bridge over 522 using some city property.
So you've heard a couple of personal issues raised, along with trying to be general on it. Any other commissioner comments? Well, thank you for coming to us with this. Thanks for your outreach and the feedback you're getting. So we look forward to hearing more from you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
All right, that brings our study sessions to a close. Next item is reports from members. Have anything? I'll say one thing. Per our bylaws, Article 4, Section 2, elections of officers is the first regular meeting in May in even years, so that's this May. I will not be chair next go-around. So, I mean, I really enjoy it. I have a lot of fun with it, but I think I've done a number of terms, and I should let other people take a turn. Be willing, more than willing to help, or more than willing to keep my mouth shut, whatever the next chair chooses. But kind of plant that seed so you all can think about that coming. Any other reports from members? No? Reports from staff.
Just a couple real quick. I do want to point out, so at the March 10th council meeting, there was a staff briefing from Public Works on the transportation safety plan. Very informative, might touch on a couple of the points that were made just recently. And definitely it'll be instructive in the work that we do in the downtown as well as other projects moving forward. At that same meeting, council did pass a resolution to forego independent study of the private amendment request and incorporate it within the Canyon Park broader, since it was just immediately adjacent, incorporated with the Canyon Park sub-area work that'll start, it's scoped to start at the end of this year. And then finally, we did have a study session on updating Title 22, the landmark preservation codes. We will bring that to Planning Commission after we have a chance to sit down with the Landmark Preservation Board themselves and go through that. That was that meeting. Our next upcoming meeting is April 1st, where we'll do a tree code update kickoff study session. So that's the only planned item that evening, but should be a good discussion to get going after the UFMP adoption. So that's it from staff.
There was a lot of discussion at the last meeting about the townhouses on 100th, and we talked about getting some feedback on that. Did you have any updates there?
All comments have been forwarded to the appropriate staff, whether it's transportation, engineering within the Public Works review division, or with the planner. So they are part of the record. If they were submitted within the public comment period, we tend to incorporate them with any. We send them on to any developer just so that they're aware of those questions, and we do respond back to individuals as best as possible with information on what the development standards are, what the mitigations that are already built into the code would require for transportation. Generally as transportation related in this case concerns. So.
A number of commissioners did express an interest in hearing feedback on that. So if you could give us an update at some future meeting, appreciate that. All right. There being no further business, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion, this is Commissioner Jones, motion to adjourn.
All right, is there a second?
Motion to adjourn, seconded.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, the meeting is adjourned at 8:14. Our next meeting will be April 1st. No fooling on that one.